I am 74 years old, and I still wake up at 5:40 a.m. Not because I have to, because I cannot help it. The house is quiet at that hour. The refrigerator hums like an old man clearing his throat. The baseboard heater clicks twice before warming up. I shuffle into the kitchen in my wool slippers, gray, worn thin at the heel, and fill the kettle I've had since 1998. It whistles a little later than it used to. So do I. On January 12, 2025, at exactly 6:03 a.m., I sat at the kitchen table with my chipped blue mug and opened my laptop to check my bank account. It was a habit I developed after my wife, Helen, died 3 years ago. When you lose someone, numbers become comforting. Numbers behave. They add up. They follow rules. They do not leave you suddenly on a Tuesday afternoon in March because of a blood clot no one saw coming. That morning, the numbers did not behave. There was a transfer I didn't recognize. $8,750. Outgoing. Memo. Renovation balance. I stared at it for a long time. My cursor blinked at me like it was impatient. I hadn't renovated anything. The only thing in this house that needed renovation was my left knee. I scrolled. December 28th, $12,400. December 3rd, $5,600. November 14th, $9,200. All labeled vaguely, project, materials, consulting. In 3 months, $35,950 had slipped out of my savings account like water under a door. Quietly, very quietly. I took a sip of tea. It tasted metallic. Now, before you decide, I'm one of those confused old men who forget where they put their glasses while wearing them. I am not. I spent 41 years as a procurement officer for a manufacturing firm in Des Moines. I negotiated contracts worth millions. I spotted discrepancies down to the cent. I once halted a $2.3 million shipment because someone miscalculated freight insurance by 0.8%. I do not forget $35,950. The account in question held the remainder of my retirement buffer. After Helen's medical bills, $184,000 total, even with insurance. And after helping my son Mark with what he called a temporary liquidity issue, I had $612,000 left as of last summer. That temporary issue cost me $67,000. But we'll get to that. I clicked into the transaction details. The transfers had been authorized through online access. My online access. There are only 2 people with legal access to that account. Me and Mark. I added him as a secondary user in April 2023. He'd insisted it was practical. "Dad, what if something happens to you?" he'd said, standing right there by this very stove, leaning against the counter where Helen used to roll out pie dough. "It'll just make things smoother. Emergencies, bills, whatever. It's just paperwork. Just paperwork." I remember signing the form at First National Bank on Grand Avenue. April 18th.2:15 p.m. The banker, a young woman named Elise, smiled too brightly. "It's very common," she said. "Families do this all the time. Families also fight all the time." She didn't add that. At 7:10 a.m., I called Mark. He didn't answer. He rarely answers before 9. He works in development. That's what he says. Real estate development. Mostly condos and mixed-use opportunities. I've learned that the more syllables something has, the less stable it usually is. He called back at 9:37. "Morning, Dad. Everything okay?" His voice was cheerful, slightly rushed. I could hear traffic, probably on I-235. "I noticed a few transfers for my savings," I said. Silence. Just a beat too long. "Oh, that," he replied. Casual. "Practiced." "Yeah. That's the Cedar Heights project. I told you about that." "No," I said. He didn't. Another pause. A small exhale. "Well, I must have mentioned it. We're renovating 12 units. Great. Short-term bridge until refinancing clears." "How much have you taken?" "It's not taking, Dad. It's leveraging. And it's temporary." "How much?" I repeated. He sighed. "About 40. Maybe 50. I'd have to check." "It's $35,950 since November," I said, "plus the $67,000 in August. That makes $102,950. Silence again. Longer this time. "You're tracking us that closely?" "Yes." A small laugh. Nervous. "Dad, you're sitting on over $500,000. It's not like you're hurting." There it was, not hurting, as if money exists only to be spent by the young and justified by the old. That money, I said slowly, is what's left of 41 years of work and your mother's life insurance and the house we sold in 2022. Come on, he snapped, irritation creeping in. It's not like you need it. What are you going to do? Take it with you. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Helen's handwriting still marked April 3rd, our anniversary. I never erased it. I need you to return it, I said. That's not possible right now. Then when? We close in March. Maybe April. Relax. Relax. I ended the call without saying goodbye. At 10:15 a.m., I drove to First National. The lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and false optimism. Elise was there, same bright lipstick. Mr. Whitaker. How are you? I'd like to revoke secondary access on my savings account. Her smile flickered. Is everything all right? Yes, I said. It will be. While she printed the forms, I noticed something else. A pending transfer. $18,500. Scheduled for January 15th. 3 days from now. Quietly, I signed the revocation papers at 10:42 a.m. And for the first time since Helen died, I felt something other than grief. I felt heat. Not loud, not explosive, controlled. They had been spending my savings quietly. If they wanted quiet, they should have stopped there. Because I have always believed one thing about numbers. They whisper at first. But if you line them up correctly, they can make a very loud sound. If you believe older voices still matter, support this channel with a like and a subscription. On January 15th, at exactly 8:12 a.m., the $18,500 transfer failed. I was sitting in my study, if you can call a small room with a metal filing cabinet and Helen's sewing table study, when the bank notification appeared on my phone. Transfer declined. Authorization revoked. I didn't smile. I don't smile at small victories. They're usually followed by louder problems. At 8:27 a.m., my phone rang. Mark. I let it ring twice. 3 times. On the 4th, I answered. Dad, what did you do? No greeting this time. I had coffee, I said. Then I reviewed my accounts. You blocked the transfer. Yes. You can't just pull access like that without telling me. I believe I just did. A sharp breath on the other end. Not angry yet. Calculation. Dad, we have contractors expecting payment. This makes me look unreliable. I'm not concerned with your appearance, I said. I'm concerned with my balance. There it was again, that silence, the kind that fills a room before something fragile breaks. We need to talk, he said finally. I agree. He suggested dinner that evening. At his house, 6:30 p.m. Laura wants to clear the air, he added. Laura, my daughter-in-law has a way of clearing the air that involves lighting a match first. I arrived at 6:28 p.m. I am not a man who arrives late to confrontations. It gives the other side time to rehearse. Their house sits in a development called Maple Crest Estates. Identical beige facades, identical trimmed hedges, identical aspirations. I helped with the down payment in 2021, $180,000, just to get us into a better school district for Ethan. Mark had said, it's an investment. Everything is an investment when it's someone else's money. Laura opened the door wearing a fitted cream sweater and an expression that could curdle milk. Frank, she said. Not Dad. Not even Mr. Whitaker. Just Frank. The dining table was already set. Salmon. Roasted asparagus. A bottle of Pinot Noir. I once bought them for Christmas. I took my seat. Mark didn't waste time. You embarrassed me at the bank. I went to the bank. I corrected. You made it look like I was stealing from you. I placed my napkin on my lap. Carefully. Precision irritates impulsive people. Were you not? Laura's fork hit the plate a little too loudly. That's insulting, she snapped. We're family. Yes, I said. That is precisely why it concerns me. Mark leaned forward, elbows on the table. He used to do that as a boy when he was about to confess to breaking something. You're overreacting. The Cedar Heights refinance is delayed because interest rates jumped. We needed a short bridge. How much in total have you moved for my account since August? He hesitated. Laura answered instead. About 120. I blinked. $120,000? It's not lost, she said. It's deployed. Deployed. Like troops? Like this was a war and I had volunteered as ammunition. He told me 40 or 50, I said to Mark. That was rough math. Rough math, I repeated quietly. On 6 figures. Laura's voice sharpened. Frank, let's be realistic. You have $600,000 sitting idle. At your age, conservative growth is pointless. You should be thinking about legacy positioning. Legacy positioning. My wife's medical file sat in my glove compartment for months before I could bring myself to take it inside. That was legacy. Tubes. Bills. Silence. My legacy, I said slowly, is not a liquidity cushion for your miscalculations. Mark's jaw tightened. You don't understand how development works. I understand contracts, I replied, and I understand consent. Laura leaned back. We've also been discussing something else. Of course they had. Mark cleared his throat. With everything getting more complex, it might make sense for us to formalize decision-making. Power of attorney, just in case. There it was, not shouted, not dramatic, slid across the table like a dessert menu. I'm not incapacitated, I said. No one's saying you are, Laura answered quickly. Too quickly. But you did forget to mention the account revocation. I did not forget. You seemed stressed lately, she continued, repeating numbers, fixating on $120,000. Mark softened his voice. He learned that tone in sales meetings. Dad, we're trying to protect you. If something happened tomorrow, things could get messy. I looked at the framed family photo on the sideboard, taken last Thanksgiving. I was slightly off to the edge, cropped but present. Messy for whom? I asked. Neither answered. Then Laura made a mistake. Well, if the bank ever reviewed your recent behavior, she said lightly, they might question your capacity. Sudden revocations, paranoia about transfers. Paranoia. The word landed heavier than any shout. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. Are you suggesting I am incompetent? No, she said, smiling without warmth. We're suggesting documentation protects everyone. I stood. At 74, standing slowly is more intimidating than standing quickly. I will not sign anything tonight, I said. Or any night. Mark's voice followed me toward the door. You're being stubborn. I turned. And you, I said quietly, are confusing access with ownership. On my drive home, snow began to fall. Thin, at first, then steady. At 9:14 p.m., my phone buzzed again. A text from Mark. We need to resolve this before the 31st. Investors are expecting documentation. Documentation. Not apology. Not explanation. Documentation. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the dark for a long time, watching the porch light reflect off the snow. On January 16th, at 8:05 a.m., I called an attorney. His name was Daniel Hargrove. I told him I needed to review 6 months of transfers totaling $120,000, discuss potential financial exploitation, and examine the legal exposure of unauthorized fiduciary movement. He listened without interrupting. Then he said something that sounded almost casual. Mr. Whitaker, bring every statement you have, and don't tell them you called me. They had spent my savings quietly. They had tried to make me small at a dinner table. But paperwork, I have learned, does not care who feels embarrassed. And I was about to line up every number that moved, one by one. On January 16th at 10:00 a.m., I sat across from Daniel Hargrove in a second-floor office above a bakery that smelled faintly of sugar and burnt coffee. He was younger than I expected, early 40s, navy suit, no wedding ring, the kind of man who reads contracts the way surgeons read scans. I placed a leather folder on his desk. Inside were 6 months of printed bank statements, transaction confirmations, screenshots of online authorizations, and a spreadsheet I'd prepared at 5:12 a.m. that morning listing every outgoing transfer since August 3rd. Total, $121,450. Daniel adjusted his glasses. Walk me through this chronologically, he said. So I did. August 3rd, $25,000. Mark called it a short-term bridge. August 17th, $42,000. Unexpected material costs. November 14th, $9,200. December 3rd, $5,600. December 28th, $12,400. January 12th, $8,750. January 15th, attempted $18,500. Declined. Daniel didn't interrupt. He circled figures in red ink. Was there written authorization for any of these? He asked. No. Emails? Text messages granting permission. Verbal discussions, I said. Vague ones. He leaned back. You added him as a secondary online user, not a joint owner. Correct. Correct. That matters. He tapped the page with his pen. Access does not equal discretion. If funds were moved beyond the scope of agreed purpose, particularly under implied pressure or misrepresentation, this becomes problematic for him. Problematic. A polite word for something that can ruin a career. I don't want theatrics, I said. I want my money returned. Daniel nodded. Then we proceed carefully. First, we document. Second, we freeze further exposure. Third, we send formal demand. I appreciated the order of it. Order comes me. At 11:37 a.m., he drafted a certified demand letter addressed to Mark Whitaker and Laura Whitaker, detailing unauthorized transfers totaling $121,450 and requesting repayment within 14 business days. It also formally revoked any implied financial authority and demanded written accounting of all funds moved. We send it today, Daniel said, and you do not communicate about money without copying me. I hesitated. They'll say I escalated this. You didn't, he replied evenly. They did. At 2:14 p.m., the letter was sent by a certified mail and email. At 4:02 p.m., my phone rang. Mark. I let it go to voicemail. At 4:04 p.m., Laura called. Voicemail. At 4:09 p.m., a text. Are you seriously accusing us of financial misconduct? I did not answer. At 6:30 p.m., they showed up at my house, unannounced. I was in the kitchen reheating soup. Lentil. Helen's recipe. Too much time. The doorbell rang twice in quick succession. I opened it. Mark's face was red. Laura's eyes were sharp and bright, the way they get when she thinks she's cornered someone. You hired a lawyer? Mark demanded. Yes. For what? We're family. That word, I said quietly, has been expensive. Laura stepped forward. You blindsided us. Investors are jittery. If this becomes public, it damages credibility. I am not concerned with your credibility, I said. I am concerned with my retirement. Mark ran a hand through his hair. You're overreacting. We were going to pay you back. When? After refinancing. You told me March, then April. Then you tried to move another $18,500. Silence. Laura crossed her arms. You're 74, Frank. Litigation stress isn't good for you. The implication hung there. Old, fragile, unstable. I held her gaze. Neither is theft. Her jaw tightened. We have documentation showing you were aware of Cedar Heights funding. Show me where I approved $121,450 in withdrawals. She didn't. Mark changed tactics. Dad, you really want this to get ugly? I almost laughed. It already is. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If this escalates, we'll have to explain your recent behavior. The bank visits, the revocation, the sudden suspicion. There it was again. Capacity, incompetence. They were building a narrative. Slowly, quietly. You're suggesting I'm not of sound mind? I asked. Laura answered this time. We're suggesting everyone benefits from clarity. Medical evaluation removes doubt. For a moment, just a moment, I felt something like cold fear. Not because I doubted myself, because I saw how easily a story can be constructed around an aging man with spreadsheets. Then I remembered something Helen used to say when contractors tried to inflate bids. Paper defeats personality. I straightened. Any claim about my capacity, I said evenly, will be met with forensic accounting. Mark's face changed. Forensic accounting is not a phrase developers enjoy. You wouldn't, he muttered. I already have. That landed. The air shifted. Laura's composure cracked just slightly. You're destroying your relationship with your son. No, I said. You are. They left without slamming the door. Controlled anger is louder. At 9:18 p.m., Daniel emailed. They've acknowledged receipt. No repayment commitment yet. However, I've learned Cedar Heights LLC is carrying substantial short-term debt. Over $480,000. I read that twice. $480,000, which meant my $121,450 wasn't a bridge. It was a bucket in a sinking ship. On January 20th, Daniel filed a petition in district court seeking injunction against further asset movement and formal accounting under fiduciary review. Not a lawsuit yet. A warning shot. By January 23rd, I received something in the mail. A notice of intent, signed by Laura's attorney. They were requesting medical capacity evaluation in light of erratic financial behavior. I placed the document on my kitchen table, the same table where I once helped Mark with algebra homework. I read it slowly. Then I poured myself tea. They had spent my savings quietly. They had tried to make me small at dinner. Now, they were trying to make me incompetent on paper. But numbers leave fingerprints. And if they wanted documentation, I was about to give them more than they could afford. The first hearing was scheduled for February 11th at 9:00 a.m. Polk County District Court, Courtroom 3B. I arrived at 8:27. I wore the same charcoal suit I had worn to Helen's funeral. It still fit, though the shoulders felt heavier now. I polished my shoes the night before, not because anyone would notice, because I would. Daniel met me near the security checkpoint. They filed a response, he said quietly. They're alleging implied consent and raising concerns about diminished financial judgment. Of course they are. He handed me a folder. Inside were copies of their filings. Phrases circled in yellow. Erratic revocation of long-standing financial access. Paranoid fixation on routine business transfers. Advanced age and susceptibility to confusion. Advanced age. 74 not fossilized. At 8:58, Mark and Laura walked in. Mark avoided my eyes. Laura did not. She wore a navy blazer and the expression of someone who believes narrative outranks fact. At 9:04, the judge entered. Honorable Cynthia Mallory. Late 50s. Measured voice. Steel behind it. We stood. Daniel opened. Your Honor, this is a matter of unauthorized financial transfers totaling $121,450 from my client's sole savings account, accessed through secondary online permissions granted for administrative convenience, not discretionary control. He handed up printed statements, each transfer highlighted, each date aligned, each amount precise. Laura's attorney rose. Your Honor, Mr. Whitaker granted ongoing access and verbally approved funding for Cedar Heights development. These transfers were consistent with prior assistance and within family understanding. Family understanding, a phrase elastic enough to strangle someone. The judge leaned forward. Was there written authorization for each withdrawal? No, Your Honor, Laura's attorney admitted. However, the judge cut him off. And is there documentation establishing fiduciary responsibility or investment agreement? Silence. No formal contract, he said carefully. The judge turned to Daniel. Mr. Hargrove? Daniel did not raise his voice. Your Honor, we are requesting a temporary injunction preventing further access. A full accounting of Cedar Heights LLC financials related to these transfers. An immediate return of remaining unspent funds pending final adjudication. The room felt suddenly smaller. Mark shifted in his seat. Laura whispered something sharp in his ear. The judge looked at me. Mr. Whitaker, do you understand these proceedings? Yes, Your Honor. Do you believe you were coerced? No. I believe I was misled. That word mattered. Misled implies direction, and someone holding the map. Laura's attorney attempted one more angle. Your Honor, given Mr. Whitaker's recent volatility, we request a medical capacity evaluation before any permanent determination. There it was again. Capacity. The judge's expression did not change. On what medical basis? Concerns expressed by family members. Family members who benefited financially? She asked. A small pause. Yes. The judge made a note. Then she looked directly at me. Mr. Whitaker, do you manage your own bills? Yes. Do you maintain financial records? Yes. Have you prepared documentation for today? Yes. Daniel handed up my spreadsheet. 12 pages. Dates. Transaction IDs. Account routing confirmations. cross-referenced email timestamps. The judge flipped through it. Methodical. At 9:47 a.m., she spoke. Temporary injunction is granted. Secondary access is formally revoked under court order. Defendants are to provide full accounting of Cedar Heights LLC finances within 14 days. Capacity evaluation is denied absent medical evidence. Denied. The word echoed louder than I expected. Mark inhaled sharply. Laura's jaw tightened, so hard I thought I heard a click. But it wasn't over. Daniel stood again. Your Honor, we would also request that any remaining funds traceable to these transfers be frozen pending review. The judge considered. Granted, that was the moment when quiet spending stopped. Because Cedar Heights LLC had over $480,000 in short-term debt. And without my remaining liquidity, their refinancing collapsed. I did not smile. I watched. At 10:12 a.m., court adjourned. Outside in the hallway, Mark finally spoke. You just destroyed my project. No, I said. You did. You could have waited. For what? Another transfer? Laura stepped forward. You've humiliated us. In public? I asked calmly. Or financially? She stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Not as aging, not as confused, as deliberate. On February 25th, the accounting arrived. It revealed something they had not mentioned. $63,000 of my transfers had been redirected, not to contractors, but to cover margin calls on a separate speculative land purchase in Laura's name, not Cedar Heights. Something riskier, something hidden. Daniel filed amended claims the next morning. Now, it wasn't just unauthorized access. It was misrepresentation and diversion. The final hearing was set for March 28th. That day, the courtroom was full. Developers, investors, a local reporter who had heard whispers about Cedar Heights stalling. The accounting spreadsheets were projected on a screen, every transfer visible, every redirection traced. When Daniel displayed the $63,000 diversion into Laura's personal holding entity, the room shifted. Investors began whispering. One man stood and walked out. The judge's voice was steady. Funds were transferred under representation of project necessity. Evidence demonstrates partial diversion for unrelated speculative activity. This constitutes financial misappropriation. Laura went pale. Mark stared at the table. At 11:43 a.m., the ruling was delivered. Full repayment ordered. Interest at statutory rate. Court costs assigned to defendants. Secondary access permanently revoked. Formal reprimand entered into public record. The courtroom was very quiet while the judge spoke. But outside it was loud. Phones ringing. Voices rising. Investors demanding explanations. Cedar Heights referencing collapsed within 2 weeks. Mark's credibility in development circles evaporated faster than snow on asphalt. I drove home alone that afternoon. The house was still. The refrigerator hummed. The heater clicked twice. I placed a court order on the kitchen table, where Helen once balanced our checkbook. They had spent my savings quietly. But in the end, the courtroom was loud. And the loudest sound of all was a judge saying my name, and meaning it. On April 18, 2025, exactly 2 years after I signed the secondary access form at First National, the repayment cleared. $121,450, plus $7,382 in interest, plus $14,600 in court-assessed legal costs. Total returned $143,432. The notification appeared at 6:11 a.m. I was already awake. I stared at the numbers for a long time, not because I doubted them, but because I understood what they represented. Not victory. Correction. Money does not apologize. It simply returns to where it belongs. Cedar Heights LLC filed for restructuring on April 30th. Investors withdrew. 2 subcontractors filed claims. The local business journal ran a short column titled, "Development Delays Raise Governance Questions." Governance questions. That is how reputations unravel in polite society. Mark called once after the funds were transferred. I let it ring. Then he left a voicemail. You didn't have to go that far. That sentence stayed with me. I didn't have to, as though protecting one's retirement was excessive. as though boundaries were violence. Laura never called. Instead, on May 2nd, I received a letter from their attorney proposing family mediation to rebuild trust. Rebuild trust. Trust is not drywall. It does not go back up neatly after you punch through it. I declined, not angrily, not theatrically, simply declined. Life after court was surprisingly quiet. No reporters at my door. No dramatic confrontations. Just the steady rhythm of mornings, tea, bank logins, and the faint hum of appliances. But something had changed. Not outside, inside. On May 14th, I met with Daniel one last time. We could pursue damages for reputational harm, he said, given the capacity allegation attempt. No, I replied. Let the record speak for itself. He closed the file. Most people your age avoid conflict, he said. Most people my age, I answered, have already paid for their houses. He smiled at that. The house, by the way, remains mine, fully. So, deed confirmed. No secondary names. No estate smoothing shortcuts. I revised my will in June, not out of spite, out of clarity. 70% of my estate is now directed to a vocational scholarship fund at the community college, where Helen once taught evening accounting classes. 20% to a local hospice. 10% to Mark. Structured, controlled, protected from discretionary access until age 65. He is 51. He will wait. On July 3rd, Ethan, my grandson, came by alone. He stood awkwardly on the porch, taller than I remembered. Dad says you're mad, he said. I am not mad, I replied. I am precise. He didn't understand that, but he nodded politely. We sat at the kitchen table. I made him tea. He didn't drink. He looked at the court order still folded neatly in the drawer where Helen once kept coupons. Was it worth it, he asked. I considered the question carefully. Yes, I said. Even if it cost all this? It didn't cost this, I corrected. It revealed it. He left after an hour. He hugged me before he walked out. That surprised me. On August 9th, I stood in the backyard trimming the hedges Helen planted in 1996. The air smelled like cut grass and late summer. I thought about that first transfer. $8,750. So small compared to what followed. That's how erosion begins. Not with collapse, with permission. I no longer grant quiet permission. There are people who believe age makes you softer. It does not. It makes you selective. I have fewer years ahead of me than behind me. That is arithmetic, not tragedy. But those years are mine. Unleveraged, undeployed, unbridged. Sometimes in the evenings I replay the moment the judge said, capacity evaluation is denied. Not because I needed validation, because I needed confirmation. Confirmation that I was still seen as I am, competent, deliberate, accountable. On September 1st, I closed a savings account and opened a new one at a different bank. New routing number, new passwords, two-factor authentication, no secondary access. The banker, another bright, polite young person, asked if I'd like to designate a family member for convenience. I looked at the pen in my hand. No, I said, convenience is expensive. The house is quiet again now. The refrigerator hums. The heater clicks twice. I wake at 5:40 a.m. as always. I make tea. I check my balances. Not because I am afraid. Because I am aware. They spent my savings quietly. They tried to shrink me at a dinner table. They tried to question my mind in a courtroom. But when the judge read the numbers aloud, every dollar, every diversion, the room listened. And that is the thing about truth. It does not need to shout. It only needs to be documented. The transfers stopped quietly, but the lesson did not. And in the silence of this house, I have never felt richer.